Everyone remembers the big 80s zombie movies, like The Return of the Living Dead or Day of the Dead. But as you probably guessed from the title, that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're digging up some mostly forgotten and often much weirder zombie movies from the decade. So how about starting with radioactive zombie children that hug you to death? The story of the children begins with a school bus driving kids home through the small town of Ravensback when it passes through a radioactive cloud leaking from a nearby nuclear power plant. Later, the local sheriff, Billy Hart, comes across the bus abandoned on the roadside. The children are gone. As he organizes a search, they slowly start to reappear around town. But something has changed. Their fingernails have turned black, and now they quietly approach their parents and pull them into a hug that burns them to death. So the town slowly realizes it's dealing with something like zombie children, and the usual ways of stopping them don't seem to work. The film clearly owes a lot to the zombie wave that followed Night of the Living Dead, and at the same time, it feels like one of those 70s evil children horror ideas pushed in a slightly stranger direction. To be fair, The Children was never meant to be a prestige horror movie, and it does have its flaws. The acting isn't exactly the strongest part of it, and the pacing can feel slow at times. But there's a certain low-budget charm here that's hard to fake. The creepy kids work surprisingly well. There's a brilliant shotgun scene, and the music might remind you of Friday the 13th, which makes sense, since it comes from the same composer. Burial Ground: The Nights of Terror is basically a ripoff of a ripoff. The film was part of the Italian zombie boom that followed Lucio Fulci's Zombie 2, which itself had been riding the success of Romero's Dawn of the Dead. So this is exactly the kind of movie we couldn't just skip. A group of people end up trapped in a countryside villa while zombies rise from the nearby cemetery and start closing in. The plot mostly exists as an excuse for scenes of the undead slowly surrounding the house and attacking the guests. The dialogue can be bizarre, and the characters often behave in ways that make very little sense. One of the strangest choices involves the character of Michael, who is supposed to be a young boy but is actually played by an adult actor. The character also has a disturbing attachment to his mother. But there's one area where the movie really delivers: the zombie makeup. The ghouls have a dry, almost mummified look that fits perfectly with the graveyard setting, and the effects are easily the most impressive thing in the film. Dead Heat takes a pretty unusual approach to the zombie idea. Instead of a horror story, it plays more like a buddy cop movie. In fact, it often feels like Lethal Weapon with zombies. Treat Williams and Joe Piscopo play two Los Angeles police officers investigating a robbery carried out by criminals who should already be dead. The bodies show signs of autopsies, yet somehow these guys are still walking around. Their investigation leads them to a company that has developed a machine capable of bringing the dead back to life. During the case, Williams's character is killed, but his partner and a pathologist manage to revive him using the same machine. Which means Roger Mortis, yes, that's really his name, now has to solve the case before his body starts falling apart. The movie mixes action, comedy, and horror in a pretty unusual way. Whether the humor works for you will probably depend on how you feel about Joe Piscopo's comedy style, but overall, the film is one of the better genre mashups of the 80s. Nightmare City is another Italian zombie film from the early 80s, but its director, Umberto Lenzi, always insisted that it wasn't really about zombies. According to him, it was more of a radiation disaster story. The film came just 4 years after the chemical disaster in the northern Italian town of Seveso, and it does feel shaped by those anxieties, with a noticeable anti-military and anti-nuclear tone. The plot follows a group of survivors dealing with an outbreak caused by radioactive contamination. The infected attack anyone in their path, and the situation quickly spirals into chaos. It is definitely worth tracking down. Just don't expect the plot to make too much sense. The story jumps between different characters and locations, and it's not always clear what exactly is happening. But the movie does stand out for one reason. It's an early example of fast zombies, with infected creatures running straight at their victims. And here's an interesting detail. The film stars Mexican actor Hugo Stiglitz, who later became a cult favorite among horror and exploitation fans. Quentin Tarantino is such a fan that he even named a character after him in Inglourious Basterds. The video dead is just absurd. 80s zombie silliness that is as hilarious as it is stupid. The story begins when a mysterious television set is accidentally delivered to the wrong house. It was supposed to go to an occult research institute, but instead it ends up in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Zombies can actually climb out of it. Soon, the undead start wandering around the neighborhood, attacking anyone who crosses their path. For some reason, many of them are dressed in old business suits, like they just walked out of an insurance office. And at one point, a zombie bride crawls out of a washing machine and attacks a housewife. The movie fully embraces the nonsense. You just have to go with it and have fun. The Dead Next Door takes place in a world where zombies have already taken over large parts of the country. An elite government squad known as the Zombie Squad is sent out to hunt down and eliminate the undead wherever they appear. During one of their missions, they discover something even worse, a cult that actually worships zombies and is trying to help them, keeping the whole plague going. But the real story behind the film might be even more interesting than the plot. Sam Raimi served as an executive producer and helped finance the film using part of what he earned from Evil Dead 2, so his friend J.R. Bookwalter could direct the zombie movie he'd always wanted to make. Raimi is credited under the strange name, the Master Cylinder. And another Evil Dead regular shows up as well, Bruce Campbell, not on screen, but as the voice of multiple characters, because much of the film was redubbed later. The movie was also shot entirely on Super 8, which gives it a very grainy, homemade look. Somehow there's an odd charm to that kind of shoddy intimacy. Dead and Buried is an absolute must-watch. Co-written by Alien screenwriters Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, the film follows Sheriff Dan Gillis and the town's coroner, William Dobbs, as they look into a series of brutal killings in a small coastal town. The victims all have one thing in common: they're outsiders passing through. As the case unfolds, Gillis begins to realize that something is deeply wrong with the town itself, and that Dobbs might be at the center of whatever is happening. And although it becomes clear fairly early that zombies are involved, the film keeps the bigger picture mysterious for a long time, turning the story into a surprisingly tense mystery. Despite receiving solid reviews at the time, the film ended up being labeled a video nasty, which kept it from reaching a much wider audience. That's a shame, because there's a lot to admire here. The practical effects, by the way, were created by Stan Winston before he became famous for films like Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park. Even this early in his career, the effects work is impressive. Let's finish the list with an absolute masterpiece of B-movie cinema. The tagline for Night of the Creeps promised, "The good news is your dates are here. The bad news is they're dead." And the movie pretty much delivers exactly that. The story takes place on a college campus where slug-like alien parasites start turning students into slow-moving killer corpses. At the same time, there's also a sweet love story, as awkward student Chris Romero tries to impress Cynthia during a formal dance while the campus slowly fills up with the walking dead. The opening scene takes place in 1959 and is shot in black and white like an old drive-in sci-fi movie, setting the tone for a film that happily mixes alien invasion, zombie horror, and dark comedy. And when the final zombie outbreak hits the campus, Chris and Cynthia end up fighting side by side to survive. Definitely a pretty memorable first date.